In 2001, Alice Ford travelled with Australian war veteran Ron Cashman on a revisit tour to South Korea. The trip was a whirlwind of formal ceremonies, dinners and speeches, but one night something special happened. As the tour passed through the city of Suwon, Ron abandoned the group to meet up with two Korean friends who fought with Australia in the war. It was the first time they had seen each other in 50 years. What this young filmmaker witnessed touched her heart. A remarkable friendship had crossed two different cultures and survived great distance and time.
It's out of fashion now, and it's not politically correct at all. But all people aren't the same. In the old tribal days, they had tradespersons in the village, all the farmers and all that sort of thing, and they had their warriors. They're a separate class of people, and I think there are still warriors. They haven't been bred out of the human race altogether.
Ron Cashman believes he was born a warrior. Growing up in World War II, he yearned to be a soldier.
I just wanted to be a very ordinary digger, nothing special. It was the excitement, I suppose. Young, stupid, and like the rest of the fellas that went there, it was basically we wanted to go and play soldiers. So we did.
Like many of his generation, he felt he had missed out on the adventures and heroism of war. So when the Korean War broke out in June 1950, Ron dropped out of school and rushed to enlist.
But when I attended to join up, I wasn't old enough and they wanted to see a birth certificate, so I had to hang on for a little while till I made the magic 18.
When Ron arrived in Korea a year later, he was sent straight to the front line. The Australians were part of a US-led United Nations force defending South Korea against the communist forces of China and North Korea. For all Ron's enthusiasm, the first few days were a shock.
The shelling and the mortaring was the big thing. That was very frightening. It didn't matter how rugged a digger you thought you were. Once that first shell or mortar landed around the place and people started screaming, that's when the reality of the whole thing hit you.
Ron found himself living in World War I-style trenches under constant artillery bombardment. The Chinese were just metres away. The fighting was vicious and close. In battle, Ron killed effectively.
It was all just automatic. If you saw somebody on the left that was shooting at you, you swung around and you fired back at them. I don't think a conscious thought ever entered your head. You just did it.
His ability in combat inspired confidence in his mates.
He seemed to have an aura about him that if you stayed near him, I felt, oh, I'll get through.
Eddie Wright fought alongside Ron throughout the war.
Well, from my point of view, I felt a lot safer with him around. He always seemed to be able to calculate the odds. He seemed to have a knack about it.
But it was not just individual skill that made Ron stand out. It was also his sense of loyalty to his fellow soldiers. For Ron, being a good soldier meant looking out for your mates to the point of risking your own life. He expected the same from everyone else.
You always knew that if you got into trouble, you weren't going to get left behind. Somebody would get you out. If it was humanly possible, somebody would get you out.
But one night, Ron's sense of loyalty was betrayed. What happened in the battle for a hill called Cloncurry would devastate Ron for the rest of his life. The fight had turned bad for the Australians. The number of Chinese on the hill had been seriously underestimated. Ron had to fight for his life as the Chinese lobbed 8 grenades at him in quick succession. With 17 pieces of shrapnel in him, Ron crawled back down the slope to rejoin his shattered platoon.
Anyway, when I got down to the bottom, everyone was in a group there. There was still shooting going on up the hill. You can tell an Owen gun sounds totally different to the Chinese weapons. An Owen gun was still firing up there, and we did a quick head count and we found out we were minus 4 men. And they said to the lieutenant, "We've got to go back, can't leave them."
He wanted to go back, and our superior told us no. We're withdrawing, so there you go.
Well, I was knocked pretty stupid, so I just didn't go back, and we heard the Owen gun firing a few more bursts, and then a couple of grenades exploded, and that was the end of it. There was no more Owen guns.
It was just one of them incidents that, oh dear, would have been better for the officer to have been wounded or killed, and then Ron would have took over. We wouldn't have lost them 3 fellas. I think that haunts him. That Cloncurry episode haunts him to this day, because there were 3 excellent diggers, you know, and we left them.
Many soldiers chose to leave, but Ron stayed on. With the army short on manpower, he was promoted to acting sergeant of his platoon. The next year, something unusual happened. Korean conscripts were brought into the Australian Army to boost the dwindling ranks. They were called CATCOMs, Korean Augmentation Troops, Commonwealth Forces. 2 Korean recruits came under Ron's command. Their names were Lee Min Bang and Kim Hung Koo. Plucked from the countryside and thrown in with Australian troops, they became foreigners in their own land. They didn't know the language nor the culture. They didn't even know how to fight.
그거야 걱정이 많이 되지. 알아듣지를 못하니까. 언어가 안 통하니까 한창 불편하지. 제대로 행동을 못하는 거지 우리가. 근데
They also had to deal with the racism of the time.
Well, in the 50s, that was the era of the Wogs and the Nogs. Any Asian or Middle Eastern race was inferior. No question about that. Prior to getting involved with them, I don't think I ever considered a Korean my equivalent. And I know none of my mates did, that's an absolute certainty.
Despite his misgivings, Ron began to see Lee and Kim's point of view.
I felt very sorry for them, really, because they were totally bewildered. They were now living in another world, another planet, if you like, surrounded by a lot of big-nosed round eyes speaking this gibberish which they've got no idea what it's all about.
Others dismissed the Koreans as poor soldiers, but Ron felt they deserved a chance. He took them under his wing and trained them for combat, with unexpected results.
They were boys dragged out of the village, all right, but when they were treated with a bit of humanity, and they knew that the officers in charge of them didn't send them in as cannon fodder, they were good diggers. Then I think after a while, the friendship started to creep in then. They came to depend on me to a degree, and I liked them. They were good lads.
Unlike Ron, Lee and Kim had not chosen to go to war. They had grown up to be farmers, not soldiers, but history changed the course of their lives. In the middle of the 20th century, Korea was a nation in turmoil. After World War II, the country had been divided by the USA and USSR into two separate states. The division sparked bitter fighting between communist and anti-communist factions across Korea. When the northern communist forces surged across the border and occupied the south, the violence escalated into war. It was a humanitarian disaster. Millions of starving refugees died as they fled the fighting. As young South Korean men, Lee and Kim's future looked bleak. They faced either starvation in their villages or conscription into the dismal South Korean army with its high casualty rate. When they were chosen to serve with the Australians, Lee and Kim were initially elated. They had food and a better chance of survival.
국군 대우에다 비유하면은
훨씬 낫지 대부에도.
유엔군 대우가 아주
훨씬 낫. 먹는 거 첫째. 먹는 게 우선 낫잖아. 보급품이.
보급품이 낫고 또 이 군대 규율. 국군보다는 상위니까.
먹는 게 우선 아니야, 먹는 게.
우선 보급.
But nothing could make up for the terrors of the front line.
우리 배속되자마자 전방으로 올라가시니까. 그 당시 이제 어두운 데 들어가니까 아주 뭐 적진 깊이 들어가는 거요.
의학새 풀이 한 개씩 넘어요. 길이 요렇게 하나이고 피는 빠지고 그러니까 온갖 총을 가지고 혼자 가는 거야.
매복 거기
그래 거기 부닥치는 거 거기서 그때가 아찔하는 거지 그냥 그때가.
논키 신문을 많이 믿은 거예요. 그 사람을 따른 거요. 역시 그야말로 이제 그 전방 배치를 한 다음에도 지원투가 끝난 다음에도 돌아요. 돌아가지고 괜찮으냐 이렇게 위로해주고 그럴 때 참 그 마음이 후련하고 하여튼 그 논키 신문이 아주 많이 돌본 것만은 사실이에요 우리를.
To Lee and Kim, Ron was a hero. But deep inside, he still blamed himself for the loss of life at Cloncurry. He felt he had failed as a warrior.
I mean, it's just, apart from the human aspect of leaving your mates for dead, there's a sense of shame too. I mean, you just don't do that.
He vowed he would never leave another man behind again. One night, late in the war, this vow was put to the test when another patrol went horribly wrong. Ron was helping his wounded commander retreat when a Chinese grenade knocked them down.
And he'd screamed like a stuck pig when he came down on his wounded arm. And there's three irate-looking Chinese chaps rushing straight towards us. They were going to finish us off, there's no beg your pardons about that. And I couldn't do a thing about it. And out of nowhere, Don Harris appeared. He had a Bren gun. I don't know where he came from. Yeah. But anyway, he finished the Chinese off, cut them down.
With his leader out of action, Ron became responsible for the platoon. He could hear wounded men out in the battlefield. He knew what he had to do. A Chinese machine gun blocked Ron from one of his men. Determined to reach him, Ron took an astonishing risk.
I stood up and called out to them. I used the Chinese word for surrender, which was taoxiong, or taoxiong, and the Japanese word for small or little, which is koshi. And I hoped to hell somebody knew what I was talking about. But it was only a little surrender, that's all. I wasn't planning on giving myself up for keeps.
Amazingly, they let him go.
Took a punt. And they didn't kill me. So there you go.
All night, Ron dodged Chinese patrols as he struggled to get the wounded men back to safety. At dawn, he finally made it to the Australian lines. Ron was awarded the Military Medal for bravery, the last of the war. He had been true to his warrior code, but it came at a cost.
Well, I didn't realise it at the time. In fact, I didn't realise it for many, many years. But I think that night on the mound, I think that was probably the straw that broke the camel's back.
His mental distress only showed when he came to lead his next patrol.
I'd picked my patrol, I was all set, then all of a sudden I was overcome with violent headache and I started vomiting all over the place and I was in the right mess. There's no way I could take a patrol out. No way on God's earth could I take the patrol out. I think I'd reached the end of my tether then, but I didn't know it.
On the 27th of July 1953, an armistice was finally declared after 3 long and bloody years of war. Having survived their ordeal, Kim Hung-koo and Lee Min-bang were overjoyed.
휴전되던 날 저녁에 내가 매복 군부에 걸렸어요. 그날 저녁에 7월 27일 날 밤 10시에 사격 중지한다고 그래서 그때까지만 살면 산다고 그래가지고 그때 밤 10시까지 그냥 그 매복하고 참고 10시가 딱 되니까 그냥 총소리가 하나도 안 나는 거나. 목이 날라는 소리가 들리는 거야. 그냥 포탄 소리가. 그래가지고 그때가 제일 기쁜 거야. 평생. 예, 아침에 전쟁이 끝나니 그렇게 기쁠 수가 없었어요. 밤 10시.
Ron felt differently.
I think it was probably a letdown if anything else. Well, put it this way, I was over there doing what I wanted to do.
When the post-war tedium set in, Ron couldn't cope.
And then they set up a semi-permanent camp, and when they started painting the rocks white, that was time for me to go. I fled like a startled goose. I'd had enough of that.
Ron left for Australia at the first opportunity. Lee and Kim were devastated by Ron's departure.
이제 그 논기 신문이 임기를 마치고 귀국을 할 때 참 그 친형제를 이제 못 만나는 곳으로 보내는 그런 슬픔을 내가 가졌었다고.
But as he rushed to depart, Lee and Kim's feelings caught Ron by surprise.
And leaving Bang was crying, really cut up about the whole thing that I was going. And I remember he came running up the hill after me just to get that last farewell in. And I did a thing that I've bitterly regretted ever since. I promised that I would write to them when I got home. And I never did. I always thought of Kim Hung Koo and Lee Min Bang, but I just never put pen to paper. I was always ashamed of that.
Ron returned to Australia and was welcomed home a war hero. He was only 20. Waiting in Sydney to greet him was his pen pal Betty. For the past year, Ron and Betty had been exchanging letters and photos with increasing frequency.
She was very attractive, blonde. She was about 5'7" in the old scale, and legs to match, etc., etc. Yeah, she was quite a sort, as we called it in those days. Yeah, very attractive. Actually, she sent me some pin-up photos. One of herself posing on the beach in a pair of shorts with her chest pushed out, and anyway, I used to carry those photos with me when I sallied forth in to do business with my Chinese friends. So if ever I was taken prisoner or anything, at least I'd have had those photos to think about while I was rotting in a prisoner of war camp.
It didn't take long for the pen friends to fall in love. Within months, Ron and Betty were getting married.
Then we were married on the 14th of February, about 4 months later, I suppose. And it wasn't a shotgun marriage either, by the way, as much as her family thought it was. But it wasn't.
With Betty, Ron embarked on the next phase of his life. But the honeymoon didn't last long. The damage done to Ron by war soon began to show.
And the first sign of what I was like happened one day. I was in my mother's kitchen, and Mum walked out from the lounge room carrying, I can still see it, carrying a tray with cups and saucers and spoons and the sugar and milk, etc. As her foot, I didn't hear her on the carpet, but as her foot touched the lino, I dropped whatever I was doing at the sink and fell to a crouch and swung around with my hands in a phantom grasp of an Owen gun. Frightened the living daylights out of Mother. She threw the tray and contents up in the air in shock. So that was the first indication that I had that I was a bit on the towy side.
Ron struggled to keep his new life going, but his condition got worse and worse. Delusions, anxiety, and crippling remorse increasingly overwhelmed his life. The mist would rise up and envelop him. Trapped in the mountains of Korea, he was tortured by memories he desperately needed to forget. Night times were the worst.
You're laying in bed in the early hours in the morning and your mind's going 100 miles an hour. I lost a lot of sleep, if you like, over Cloncurry was my sore point. I could never ever get that out of my mind. I felt terribly guilty about that.
Falling asleep brought no respite. In his dreams, he fought the war again and again. Betty would awake to find Ron trying to crawl up the walls which had transformed into mountains. He even mistook her for the enemy and tried to strangle her in bed. Life became so unbearable that several times Ron attempted suicide in a bid for relief. In the midst of this torment, Ron and Betty were trying to raise their 4 girls. Both cared deeply about having a happy family.
Well, I think that's what they wanted, number one, but the times and their finances and Dad's health problems, it must have been a struggle.
Through the 50s and 60s, Ron was in and out of hospital and often too sick to work. Betty stood by him as he suffered.
I suppose Mum saw more, helped more and suffered more, but she shouldered it. She could see there was a good man in there.
But inevitably the strain took its toll. Several times Betty reluctantly left Ron just so she could cope. In the psychiatric hospitals of the time, Ron found little help. He was given no effective treatment, just sedated with drugs. The hopelessness of his situation led to frustration and despair.
I hadn't been to sleep for about 2 days and nights. They'd refused me medication for some reason or other. And this particular morning, I'm laying on the bed and lo and behold, I've dozed off. I have actually gone to sleep. And a poor nursing sister had the misfortune to come along and shake me. And I awoke in a violent rage and I fairly exploded. Sent her running away in tears. Had the male orderlies grappling with me. So bang, and I spent one session in the padded cell and another session in a stretcher and a straitjacket.
For Ron, the stigma of mental illness was so great that he refused to accept he had a problem.
I used to sit back very aloof and say, oh, those poor sods. It never entered my head that I may possibly be a sod too. I was an interested spectator.
40 years went by before Ron found any real help.
He had another nervous breakdown in the 80s when I was living with them. That sort of came to the surface what he was living with.
Finally, he saw a specialist in war-related illness. For Ron, the diagnosis was a revelation.
In it he stated that in all his years of practice I was the most authentic case of post-traumatic stress disorder that he had come across.
Back in post-war Korea, Lee Min Bang and Kim Hung Koo endured extreme hardship. South Korea was left in rubble. Its economy ruined. There was no money to assist veterans. Lee and Kim had to cope as best they could. Finding work, feeding their families, and building new homes was a never-ending struggle. But like Korea itself, they eventually prospered. Kim Hung-koo became a businessman in Suwon. Lee Min Bang returned to farming his land. As they toiled to rebuild their lives and country, they wondered about the man who had helped make it all possible.
그래서 오스트레일리아 하면 론기 신문. 그러니까 소대장이 썼어도 그 긴 세월을 살아오면서 논기 신문에 대한 생각은 늘 했지.
With a better understanding of his illness, Ron was now able to seek appropriate treatment. He was sent to see Dr. Manzi, a retired psychiatrist who specialised in hypnosis.
On his first experiment, he wanted me to think of a place that I'd been that was probably the most relaxing and the most beautiful that came to mind. And as it happened, the place that I thought of and have always considered the most beautiful was on top of a mountain in Korea in the autumn when the thick fog was around, and the fog used to be sitting over the top of it on a peak of a mountain. It was for all the world like this magnificent milky ocean. You got the impression you could walk on it, it was so thick. It was a view and an experience that I had and I never forgot. I always remembered this mountain top and the mist. What he did was hypnotise me, got me to visualise myself on top of that mountain, and then he experimented with various aspects of my being on the mountain and what have you, and one of them was to lead me step by step, literally down the mountain into the mist and into all the trees that were down there. But then as he started to take me lower, I started to panic because I knew there were Chinese down there.
Over a number of sessions, Dr. Manzi helped Ron through the mountains and out of the mist. After just 3 months of treatment, he was able to lead a normal life again. Now in his 60s, Ron felt a long way from the war hero he once was. For 40 years, he had avoided all connection with the Korean War. But in an effort to find his old self, he instinctively turned back to his past.
I suddenly got back into the swing of things. I joined the Korean Southeast Asian Vets Organisation. Pre-Peter Manzi, I probably wouldn't have. But post-Peter Manzi, I was a different person. So I was able to get to meet with these blokes. No drama at all.
Since then, Ron has been making up for lost time.
It's a pleasure, Mr. Hart.
He has reunited with old comrades, attended ceremonies, developed a Korean War website, and returned to Korea 8 times. He even travelled to China to meet with the former enemy. Ron felt a proud veteran once more, but still his victory over post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't complete. Lingering in his mind was his failure to keep his promise to Lee Min Bang and Kim Hung-koo.
For years I carried a burden of guilt that I never did right. They were my diggers. I knew what happened to everybody else, but I didn't know anything about Kim Han Koo and Lee Min Bang, and I felt I should. I wanted to know what happened to them.
The way I think of Dad, I think it would have hurt him over the years not being in touch with them, because I'm sure he would have, if he wasn't ill, I think he would have always been in touch with them.
Ron resolved to find his Korean friends. But with just names and photos to go on, finding Lee and Kim was easier said than done.
I'd have had to have been looking for them probably for 10 years, through first of all the embassy, and then through the Veterans Association and the CATCOM Association, and one way or another. It would have been 10 years. And then I became friends with a Korean chap that he was a PR man for the United Nations Cemetery down in Pusan. Out of the blue, I thought, I wonder if he can track them down. If there's any, so I told him all about them.
부산 국립묘지관리사무소에서 국립묘지관리사무소에서 전화가 왔어요. 김은구냐고 그래 그렇다 그랬더니 그 어디신데 그랬더니 관리사무실이라고 그래. 호주에서 론 캐시브라는 분이 당신을 찾는다 이거지. 론 캐시브라는 건 이때까지 잊어먹지도 않았거든. 50년 동안 안 잊어먹어 머리에. 세상에 어떻게 알고 찾았나 해서 감동을 느낀 내가 진짜. 어떻게 찾았겠어 그걸 세상에 외국 사람이.
On the eve of the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, Ron is returning to Korea. It's been 2 years since Ron first saw Lee and Kim, just for a few hours. His return has been delayed by some serious health problems.
Well, actually I had a heart attack, a rather severe one. It knocked me around a fair bit. And it looked for a while as though I wasn't going to be able to make this trip, which was very distressing to me. I wanted to see the boys this one last time. Last time was too short. It was sweet, but too short. This time I'll make up for it. Got 50 years to catch up on.
Someone's coming.
Hello, my friend.
Thank
You're looking very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bang,
Thank you very much.
my old friend. My friends.
건강이가 안 좋다는 얘기 어떻게?
I heard your health is not.
Oh, yeah, this thing up here. Goes tick, 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 tick,
예,
tick, tick.
그 전자 그거 다르셨다고 이렇게.
걱정이지 뭐 걱정.
And look at this.
대 나오신 거.
Jubanjimano,
건강해 건강하고 이런.
Do they know anyone in this? That's you. And that's him.
이거 미안할래.
On their first day together, the men re-establish their friendship.
해가지고 우리 집 많이 가지고 줘가지고 있다고 그래.
Through Ron's photos and website, they begin their journey back into the past.
키시문 같은데. 넌
예. 예, Ron.
왜 나한테? 왜 나이가?
That's me. That's me.
Kim Han-koo, Ron Cashman.
난 캐시문이야 돼.
1953, I think. 1953.
건강하게 보인다.
Unlike Ron, Lee and Kim have not had many opportunities to formally reminisce. With Ron as their guide, they take their first visit to a war museum.
어은가 여기 저 쳤어요. 어은가. 제가 제일 인기가 좋았던
조금
거.
조금 더 적은 것 같은데 그때.
Look like smaller than.
근데 이거는 투헤비.
Yeah,
너무
but very good.
좋기는 한데 너무 무거워가지고 그냥.
good, but
어떻게 이렇게 똑같이 만들어놨나 그 전에 우리 이렇게 사는 거.
Yes.
이렇게 살았다고 이렇게
exactly same way.
그 나라하고 똑같아지 뭐 이게.
그 당시에 뭐 제일 못 사는 나라 중에 하나였죠.
하나지 얻어먹고 배고파.
우리 애들을
예.
꼭 데리고 와야 돼. 이런 거.
글쎄 그 겨울
다 그때 그 당시 그다 주변에서 형 지금도 눈에 스어낸 걸 뭐. 이걸 다 경험을 했으니까.
여기 그 당시 먹던 것도.
But for all the men, returning to the front line is the most significant way of remembering their time together. After 50 years have passed, tension on the Korean peninsula is no closer to being resolved. As North Korea reactivates its nuclear program, the situation has become worse. To reach their former battlefields, the men must enter the demilitarised zone between North and South Korea. In the current political climate, it's a special privilege.
수의대.
이거 다리. 아, 다리 우리가 있잖아 이거. 그래 인진강. 이거.
For Lee and Kim, this is the first time they have seen this part of their country since the war. Ironically, Ron has been here before. For him, the significance of the trip is not in seeing the battlefields. It's being there with Lee and Kim. For this is where he left them 50 years ago.
North Korea? Yeah, North Korea.
For all the bloodshed these mountains have seen, they still have a striking beauty. The gunfire may have stopped, the trees may have grown back, but for all of the men, this place is still haunted by war. Nowhere more so than Hill 355, where they once fought together.
이렇게 위험한 지역을 막 관광을 하게 되니 참 감기가 무량해요. 트렌치와 트렌치 사이로만 그냥 이렇게 숨어 다니던 곳이었었는데 이렇게 그야말로 이렇게 평화롭게 쳐다보니 참.
Anyway,
This 355.
355는 속이 시원해. 속이 시원해 이제. 저걸 꿈에도 날 그렸는데 내가 꿈에도 그냥.
For Ron, this day marks the end of his quest to put things right with Lee and Kim. Just as in hypnosis, coming back to the mountains of Korea has brought Ron triumph over the trauma of war.
Then he got me to visualise putting all the things that were worrying me into my kit bag, my old army kit bag, and to make my way over to the side of the mountain and visualise a sheer drop there, which was easy to do. And then when I got totally overwhelmed, to take my kit bag and swing it and hurl it into the void over the side of the mountain. So he trained me with this exercise. Take myself to the top of the mountain, down into the mist, take my kit bag and dispose of it. And whether I was actually doing self-hypnosis or not, I couldn't really say, but it worked. And over several months of his treatment, my life just changed completely. Well, I will be pleased to go home, but I am going to miss my Korean friends. It's been a class reunion of the first degree. I'm sure they've enjoyed it every bit as much as I have. They've told me some hilarious things, like my favourite was the girl in the barrel story.
이 친구는 아주 그것 때문에 혼났다고 아주.
나 바람 나가지고 혼났어.
왜냐면은 도라무통에다가 여자를 넣고서는 이렇게 엎어놓고서는 전방에 들어오는 거야. 이게 도라무통 모르지. 그 산속에다 묻어놓고. 그래서는 아침 저녁으로 밥 타다가 먹이는 거요. 거기다가.
They actually hit a girl in the sort of drum plateau. And they used to give some food to her.
그래서 여기 군대원 소대원도.
How come they never told me?
어떻게 한 번도 말씀 안 하셨나 그러시는데?
이 높은 사람이라
You're a surgeon or just a private.
That's a very poor excuse.
아주 참 그 변명치고는 고차다 그러시는데.
소대원들 다 갔어요. 그 어떤
소대원 다 갔다. 소대원도 다 갔다.
Except for you, everyone knows.
다 가는 거야. 이렇게 10분만 안 가고 다 가는 거야.
All that remains is for Kim and Lee to formally thank Ron. Ron now feels ready to receive Kim and Lee's deep appreciation for all that he did all those years ago.
문화가 다르신데 저희 어르신이 입에 맞으실지 모르시겠네요. 예, 차릴 거 없어도 좀 많이 드세요. 맛있게 드세요.
There is more than I know what to do with, and I do not know how to say thank you enough.
너무 많으셔서 진짜 어떻게 뭐 드실지
나 하나 같으면 평생 잊지 못하고 살 것 같아요. 우리나라 한국 사람보다도 더 정이 간다고.
그 모든 인격적으로 손색이 없는 분이라 다른 사람에게도 그 존경을 받으리라고 생각했고,
각국에 살면 맨날 저녁마다 가서 맥주 한 잔씩 먹고 싶다 그랬다고. 주먹질에 그냥 싸웠지 한번.
나와. 아버지도 일어서시죠. 아버지 어머니 쓰시죠. 달려.
어머니 저기 아빠
좋은 사람은 같이 여기 있어야 돼.
좋아요.
When I get home, I'm going to keep the promise that I broke 50 years ago, and I'll sit down and I'll write a lengthy letter to both Lee Min Bang and Kim Hung Koo, I explained to them just how much I appreciated our service together and our friendship, and may they live another 50 years.